Book number 4 is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And yes, hi, I think you've noticed the difference. The fact is that it's not really a business book. To be completely honest, it's a story. And there's a big gap between when you're voicing business literature that doesn't have any plot and story, because business you can dissect, literature you can pull out some interesting ideas and tell them in the form that I do now. And in general, after that, when you usually hear my conclusions, you don't lose interest. Take this book the next day if you liked it, of course, and read it from the quirks to the crust. As for telling it, everything is more complicated here. You know it from the model. Well, for example, take and tell about all the Harry Potter books that there are small ox that eventually defeats the bad wizard. That is, all this magic that you and the main character go through from beginning to end disappears. It's sad. And at the moment, Zen is the art of motorcycle maintenance. I want to tell you in advance, this book is not here by chance at all. The fact is that when I consciously and confidently took up books, I was 18 years old, and I realized that if I read the same business literature all the time, my brain would harden. Because sooner or later, you need to take a breath of fresh air. You need to absorb new information and books from different genres. Since business literature is mostly similar, the only difference is that new characters, new events, new times. At the same time, stories, modern prose, or whatever else allows you to develop your imagination. And this is very important for an entrepreneur because a successful entrepreneur is not a portfolio in which many different information is collected and he can pull it out once. Everything happens a little differently, well, at least in my picture of the world. If I face a difficult task, I first need to be creative to solve this problem. Because if you understand that I have a cash gap, what I need to do is I remember the book Thinking Richer, and then the author advised me to do it. Well, no, of course it is. It doesn't happen. That is, in any case, reading stories allows you to think differently. And this fantasy is, in fact, a small key to solving the problems that I encounter from time to time. Yes, this book does not quite fit the criterion that I will recommend to everyone. It is an insanely difficult book. In general, when I took it up, of course, I expected to get a different result. The book is about travel, but as it turned out later, I read and cried. I cried. I read this incredibly complex book. Surely you've heard about the author of Seven, Nicholas Stalick. This author, he wrote a book like Anti-Fragility. He wrote a book like Black Swan. And yes, these cabins are now on my shelf. I'm really afraid to pick it up because it's damn complicated. I remember opening it 3 years ago, reading probably 20 pages and sitting with a glassy stare because I'm nothing I didn't understand. And then I felt terribly offended because I read a lot about Kamen, but for some reason I don't understand shit. And then I set a goal for me to grow up to this book. I will read simpler literature. And a year and a half ago, when I read, for example, Black Swan, I read and cried the same way. I read and cried. It was difficult, but I do not know for whom these books are written, perhaps for researchers or super smart people to whom I do not attribute myself. This is complex reading and just Zen. And the art of caring for riding a motorcycle is much more difficult and insidious because when you take this book, there's completely different information written on the back. You plan that together with the author, you will begin to immerse yourself in the journey. The author is just with his son. I traveled across America on a motorcycle. But the problem is that the further you went, the more complicated everything became. So much more complicated that the author just takes and immerses you, whether you want it or not. I don't want my philosophical speculations to be so complicated that I'm sorry for the tautology of difficult to convey, because for example, there are probably 200 whole pages about quality. That is, the author discusses what quality is, and it is unpleasant to read. The fact is that, for example, there is business literature that is a hybrid. It's not quite the story, and it's about business at the same time. That is, you read and are like, wow, this is native, or rather, perception is much easier when you don't just read some dry extracts from the category. For example, a book, what is it called there? Toyota Corporate Culture is an insanely boring book. You start biting your elbows already on the second page. For example, books like Goals of Continuous Excellence, I don't remember the author, unfortunately. It counts in one breath because it's an easy story that contains cool business ideas that you can use and introduce. But still, in Zen, the art of caring for riding a motorcycle is not so. Well, imagine the author talks about how he rides from one point to another, and then without asking you if you are ready for it, he immerses you in his philosophical thoughts that are so complex that you get lost, you fall out of it. And most likely the most important problem is that there are no images that you would associate with yourself. That is, get me right, we pay great attention to those details that are somehow related to our life. That is, for example, a story that doesn't concern us at all, a story that we cannot use in any way in our lives, is perceived as an echo and very far away. And I caught myself thinking that I read 2 pages and didn't understand anything, and I had to come back in order to rethink this idea. But the most important thing is the moment when you don't understand at all why the author told this or that thing. For example, yes, this is not a spoiler, but I need to tell you an example from the book. The author and his son decide to hiking in the mountains, and just in my picture of the world, I imagined that yes, if you're going to rub philosophy here, then certainly something will happen at the moment when you climb the mountain. Well, damn it, nothing happens. That is, it would seem 50 pages are described about how the character is the main character books go up into the mountains with my son, and nothing changes. That is, nothing changes dramatically. Or I'm kind of overly romantic in terms of what I imagine if you're going to go hiking in the mountains. You at least have to come back a little bit as a different person. That is, for example, a book like 7 Years in Tibet, I also expected that there would be some wow effects, that the person would definitely change, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. Fats thought that maybe I wouldn't go to the mountains. Well, more precisely, I set a goal for myself this year to go to the mountains, and then you realize that something has somehow failed to get anything meaningful from this hike for 2 whole authors. It upset me terribly. In summary, this book is not the kind of literature that is worth taking, I don't know, by the sea, reading it on the beach, and treating it superficially. It's an insanely deep book. And to be honest, I wasn't ready for this depth. I felt like a stupid idiot to this day, because on one hand, such literature would seem to need to be reread to understand all the concepts. But on the other hand, everything that is written there seems completely unnecessary to me, and the author, acting as a little super genius like Jimmy Neutron, forgets that he needs to be in the moment, here and now. That is, it would seem the philosophical idea is that you need to look at the same things from different angles, but none of this makes sense when life passes through you, when you live all the time in the past, when you remember that my parents raised me badly, I was given a bad education at school, my environment was so bad that it slowed me to living in the past is always bad for success. And it would seem that the author is trying to explain it, but in such a veiled way and with such an additional unnecessary burden that you forget about it and the author forgets about it. The author is in search and in a race. He goes somewhere far away all the time, but he forgets about this important truth. So, unfortunately, the only thing I realized is that it doesn't matter how stupid or smart a person is. Of course, everything is subjective. The most important thing is to be in the moment here now and let it be theoretically understandable. And now you can frown. I knew it all anyway. But unfortunately, a lot of people know it, but they can't use it in their lives. So look at the calendar right now. It's June 31st. It would seem that the last month of summer is left. I don't know about you, but it scares me. And I understand that you need to live here and now, and I advise you, so I exhaled. The next story will most likely be in 3 books if it led to the pleasure of immersing myself in new literature for now.